The sack on the porch. The wide plains of Montana had a silence that pressed on the soul. Wind carried dust across the open land, whistling against weathered fence posts and rattling the loose shingles of a ranch house that had long since stopped echoing with laughter. Inside that house lived Ethan Cole, a man whose name the nearby townsfolk said with a kind of wary respect. A giant of a figure, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, he kept to himself more than most. He had once been young and eager, full of plans to run the land with his family, but the years had taken their toll, grief burying love, and solitude hardening what was left. It had been nearly a decade since Ethan had lost his wife, and in all those years he had lived alone with his horses and cattle, the land his only company. He was known as the Lonesome rancher, a man who might show up in town once a month for supplies, rarely speaking more than a handful of words. On the morning that would change everything, Ethan was fixing the latch on his corral gate when he noticed something strange. A burlap sack, tied shut with rough cord, sat right on the wooden planks of his front porch. At first, he frowned, wiping sweat from his brow beneath his hat. He had no visitors, no reason for anyone to leave something at his door. Coyotes sometimes dragged odd things near the house, but this sack was too neatly placed, too deliberate. Suspicion prickled in his gut. He set down his tools and strode toward the porch, each boot step crunching against the gravel. The closer he got, the more unease crept into him. "Please, open it. I can't breathe." The voice was faint but desperate, muffled by the sack's coarse fabric. Ethan froze. His heart slammed hard against his ribs. He thought for one insane second that the wind was playing tricks on him, that maybe the loneliness of the plains had finally driven him mad. But then the sack shifted, and a weak hand pressed against the inside, clawing for freedom. "Please," the voice sobbed. "It's too tight. I can't." The rancher lunged forward, pulling at the knot that sealed the sack shut. His rough hands fumbled with the cord, fingers thick and clumsy with panic. Whoever was inside was suffocating. Finally, with a curse, Ethan tore the knot loose and yanked the sack open. A girl tumbled out. She hit the porch floorboards hard, gasping, dragging air into her lungs with ragged gulps. Her hair spilled loose around her shoulders, tangled and damp with sweat. Dirt streaked her cheeks, and her wrists were red with raw marks from the tight cords that had bound them. Ethan staggered back a step, stunned. She couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. Thin, pale beneath the grime, her dress torn at the sleeve. She coughed violently, clutching at her throat as if air itself were a gift she'd thought never to taste again. Ethan's shock anchored him in place. For a long, heavy moment, the only sounds were the girl's desperate breaths and the restless stamping of a horse in the nearby corral. Finally, he found his voice, low and rough from disuse. "Who did this to you?" The girl looked up at him, eyes wide, rimmed with terror. For an instant, she seemed to shrink back, as if unsure whether he was rescuer or captor. Her lips trembled, and she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Only a hoarse whisper escaped. "They'll come back." Her warning hung in the air, dark and unfinished. Ethan's hand tightened unconsciously on the brim of his hat. He had seen many things on the ranch, but never had he pulled a living, breathing human out of a sack left on his porch. Whoever had abandoned her here hadn't meant for her to survive. And now, by opening that sack, he had stepped into something far bigger than his quiet, lonesome life could ever have prepared him for. The shadows that followed. The girl didn't sleep that night. Ethan had given her a blanket and a place on the worn leather sofa by the fireplace, but she sat upright most of the time, knees drawn close, eyes darting at every creak of the wooden house. The sack still lay crumpled in a corner, a grim reminder of her ordeal. He had tried asking questions. Who she was, where she came from, who had left her at his porch like that. But all she had said, in a voice barely more than a whisper, was, "They'll come back." It was enough to put Ethan on edge. The rancher wasn't a man who trusted easily, but the fear in her eyes wasn't something she could fake. He'd seen fear in animals cornered by wolves, in calves caught by barbed wire, in the eyes of men during brawls that went too far. Hers was deeper. It was the kind of terror that carved scars into the soul. By dawn, Ethan was outside, saddling his horse, eyes scanning the horizon. The land stretched wide and open, but in its emptiness, he felt watched. Inside, the girl, who finally told him her name was Clara, stood at the window, hugging the blanket around herself. Her voice trembled when she spoke. They didn't want me to be found. You shouldn't have opened it. Now they'll know you helped me. Ethan adjusted the cinch on his saddle with steady hands. Who's they? She flinched. Men. Bad ones. My uncle owed money. He couldn't pay, and when he ran, they came for me instead. Said I was the payment. Her words hung heavy in the crisp morning air. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd lived long enough to know there were men who'd sell another's life for debt, power, or cruelty. He also knew such men didn't take kindly to losing what they thought was theirs. You're safe here, he said finally, his voice firm. Ain't no one coming onto my land without me knowing. Clara's eyes searched his face, doubtful but desperate to believe. The first test came by afternoon. Ethan was mending a broken fence rail when his dogs began barking, deep and furious. Dust plumes rose on the road leading up to the ranch. A wagon rattled closer, drawn by 2 lathered horses. 3 men rode with it. They weren't locals. Ethan knew every soul for 30 miles. These men wore long coats despite the heat, their hats low, pistols heavy on their hips. One spat tobacco juice into the dirt as they drew to a halt by the house. Ethan straightened, setting down his hammer. The lead man, thin and sharp-eyed, tipped his hat mockingly. Morning, rancher. Fine spread you got here. Ethan said nothing. His silence had a way of unsettling men, and he let it stretch. The stranger smirked. We're lookin' for something that went missing last night. Little package. You wouldn't have seen it, would ya? Inside the house, Clara froze, pressing her back to the wall. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Can't say I have. Roads are open. Plenty passes through. The man's smile thinned. Funny. We tracked it right here. Burlap sack, tied neat. You sure you ain't seen it? Ethan let the weight of silence fall again, then slowly shifted his stance so the revolver at his hip was in plain view. I don't take kindly to strangers accusin' me of things on my own porch. The air tightened. The dogs growled, hackles raised. The lead man studied Ethan's towering frame, the iron steadiness in his eyes, and after a tense pause, gave a short laugh. Easy, friend. Just a skin, questions. If you do happen to see anything, you'll let us know. Without waiting for an answer, he flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled away. Only when the dust settled did Ethan step back inside. Clara was pale, shaking. That was them. If they know I'm here. They don't, Ethan cut her off firmly. But if they come again, I'll be ready. That night, the rancher didn't sleep either. He kept watch with his rifle propped by the door, listening for any sound beyond the restless whisper of the wind. Clara dozed fitfully in the chair across from him, her face softened in uneasy dreams. Ethan studied her in the firelight. She was just a girl, caught in a storm not of her making. He thought of his own daughter, if he'd had one. What kind of man would he have been then? Less hard, perhaps. Less alone. The thought hardened into resolve. He would not let her be taken again. The storm broke at dawn 2 days later. Ethan had taken Clara to the barn, showing her how to brush down a horse, hoping the simple rhythm would calm her nerves. She smiled faintly for the first time, murmuring thanks as the animal leaned into her gentle strokes. Then the dogs barked again. This time, furious and unrelenting. The men were back. 5 now, not 3. Armed, faces grim. They didn't bother with questions. Gunfire split the morning air. Ethan shoved Clara to the ground behind a hay bale. Stay down! The rancher's rifle roared, echoing across the open land. One man went down hard, screaming. The others scattered for cover, pistols cracking. Wood splintered around them as bullets punched into the barn walls. Ethan moved with the calm fury of a man defending more than land. His shots were precise, measured. 2 more fell before the others realized this wasn't a fight they'd win. "Fall back!" one shouted, dragging the wounded into the wagon. They retreated in a cloud of dust, leaving silence broken only by the ragged panting of horses and the pounding of Ethan's heart. Clara crawled from her hiding place, eyes wide with shock. You fought them off." Ethan reloaded, gaze fixed on the road. "They'll be back. Men like that don't forget. But next time, I won't wait for them to come." Clara's lip trembled. You'll come after them?" Ethan finally looked at her, and in his eyes was a steel she hadn't seen before, the fire of a man who had buried enough loss, who would not let another innocent be swallowed by cruelty. "I don't run from wolves," he said. "I hunt them." By the week's end, the rancher rode into town with Clara at his side. The law was slow, weak in these parts, but word spread fast. Folks listened when Ethan Cole spoke, and when he laid the bodies of 2 dead outlaws at the sheriff's feet, the message was clear. Clara, no longer just a frightened girl from a sack, stood straighter by then. She still trembled at shadows, but beside Ethan, she found a kind of strength she didn't know she had. And Ethan, once a lonesome rancher whose world had shrunk to silence and empty fields, found something stirring in his heart. Not love, not yet. But purpose. Because sometimes, the land doesn't choose the man. Sometimes, it's the broken souls who stumble onto his porch, pleading for breath, who remind him what it means to fight, to protect, to live again. The sack was gone, burned to ashes in the fire pit. But its memory lingered. And as Ethan Cole stood on his porch once more, watching the horizon with Clara safe inside, he knew one thing for certain. The men who had left her to suffocate in the dark would never come again. Because he would not allow it. Not on his land. Not while he still drew breath.